In this section, obviously, you understand now that we're going to be reading the Amigo Brothers, and the literary element that we will be focusing on is characters. So, as we read through this story, we want to look at the two main characters in the story and identify which type of characters they are. And we're going to look at the way they speak, the way they interact, the way they talk, and then things that the narrator or the author says about those characters to identify which type of character they are. So let's review the different types of characters. So first of all, we have either characters are either dynamic or static. So dynamic simply means that the character changes throughout the story. The character is one way at the beginning, but by the end of the story, beginning to end, the character changes. A static character, there's no change. Now, it doesn't mean that one character is more important than the other. If they change or if they do not change, it's simply just a category that we place the characters in. Are they dynamic? They change throughout the story, or they're static. Then we can also determine whether the characters are flat or round. So flat means that the character is uncomplicated. There's not much really happening with the character himself or herself, so they are considered to be flat. The round character is developed and complex. We really feel like we get to know them through the course of the short story. So today we're going to begin our first drama, our first one-act play called Trifles, and we're going to analyze this play for plot. We're going to look at the plot. So let's review the plot and be sure that you remember the diagram that we always draw. So at the beginning of the story and at the end of the story, we have this flow of events that are happening between that beginning and that end. So we divide that up into different sections as the story moves along. So at the beginning, we call that the exposition, and that's just simply when the setting and the characters are introduced. We begin to get to know them. We understand where the story takes place. And I'll relate to this in a moment as it relates to drama, but I just want to continue on here. And then most of the story has to do with rising action. It's the longest part of the story. It's where the conflict is building. And sometimes this rising action can start right from the get-go, and exposition is overlapping rising action, so there isn't like suddenly this point where, oh, exposition stops and rising action begins. It's just, generally speaking, it's that much. And then at the pinnacle of the story, we have what we call the climax, and that's the turning point, or it also sometimes is referred to as the conflict is at its worst. So I'm going to put a big up arrow, means it's at the top. And then the falling action is when we begin to understand how the story is going to end. All the loose ends are tied up. And then you may have noticed that I did not refer in the fiction section. In the fiction section lecture, I did not refer to resolution. Some teachers leave the resolution off, some add it, but basically this is all tied together. Some stories do not offer a clear resolution, but we still get an idea of how the conflict is going to end. So I like to include it in the textbook just because it's information that's extra and helpful in case you need that little trigger point in your mind to understand, oh, it's when the loose ends are tied up. But the falling action happens very quickly. Sometimes in a short story, it can happen within a paragraph. So we'll see how it goes in the play. But let's talk about it now in relation to a play. So the exposition, the setting, and the characters are listed at the beginning of the play, but we do not begin to understand and know how the characters relate to one another and how the setting relates to the characters or the conflict in the story or whatever until we start reading the play. So this is still applicable to the plot in general of a story. And you will still see that conflict is going to build. I'm sorry, I keep saying story, but the play, you'll still see that the conflict begins to build in the play as you read it, as characters interact with one another, or nature, or society, or internal conflict that's taking place. There is a climax, and then there's falling action and resolution. So you finished the book. You're all finished. You know the outcome. Did this story end the way you wanted it to end? Do you remember when I said to you earlier in the story, I want you to think about person versus society? Who was in conflict with the ideas of society? Do you remember when I talked about a person in the story who might be a dynamic character because there was change involved? Do you remember that? Do you remember when I had you read something that Atticus told Scout about walking in someone else's shoes and seeing life from their experience? Do you believe that made Scout consider a lot of things throughout the story and change as a person? There's a lot to think about. I mean, this story is unbelievable. But unfortunately, that's not the discussion for today's activity. I want to talk to you about theme. Theme is the overall message about life that it's like basically the underlying meaning about, but it's a message about life that we can walk away with and say, here's what the message is from this story, from this book. And so, with theme being a meaning or idea of a literary work that's hidden, it's underneath, we also want to consider that theme is intentionally repeated throughout a work using action, dialogue, and symbolism. So, we've been talking about symbolism. We identified that in the last lesson you did. That is going to affect the theme. Welcome back for the Writing Connection and Breaking Boundaries activities for today. This is the only time I will be teaching on day 4. I just want to go over with you the Writing Connection and help you to understand a few things. So, with each Writing Connection activity, there are several different things that I may have you do in relation to writing poetry. So, the main thing is that when you're asked to write poetry, please do not stress out. This is more about practicing it and giving it a try than it is about getting it right, okay? We're exploring poetry and its literary value, and we're looking at it in from many different views and ways to explore it. But with writing, it's very important for you to just practice. So, for example, today's activity says there are very few rules for writing poetry, so that's good. Any subject can be turned into a poem, and any rhyme or rhyme scheme can be used or ignored, so you get to choose, and any number of themes, great or small, can be expressed. The key to writing poetry is being intentional about one's rhythm and word choice, and to employ figurative language and poetic elements as they fit into the poem. So, let's say that I'm going to write about a particular topic, and let's say I'm going to, well, let's see what the assignment says. Write a poem that means something to you personally, either an expression of your feelings or thoughts, or a description of something or someone important to you. So I have had a grandmother who passed away at the age of 98, and she was a wonderful person. And by the way, I'm just doing this off the cuff. I have not prepared anything. So I want to show you what it looks like to simply just practice poetry. So I'm going to just write a few things that come to my mind, and I'm going to do it in phrases, because when I write poetry, it helps me to just think in terms of phrases. So I'm going to remember what it was like to be with her. Because I spent a lot of time with her when I was a young man and enjoyed it tremendously. All right, so immediately I'm hearing her talk and I want to express that. So I could say, I hear your voice. That's fine. I could write that. But I'm trying to be a little more figurative in a way, the tenderness of your voice. So the word tenderness really communicates the sweet person that she was. The tenderness of your voice, the gentle of your smile. Now, that really doesn't make grammatic sense, but to me, haha, poetry doesn't have many rules, and it really does make sense to me because her smile was gentle. So, the gentle of your smile. Plus, it flows with what I mentioned here in the textbook that the key, let's see here, the key to writing poetry is being intentional about the rhythm and word choice. And I'll be employing some figurative language, hopefully, as I think through this. The tenderness of your voice, the gentle of your smile.